When we talk about multiple sclerosis, the story is usually pretty straightforward. The body's immune system attacks the brain. But what if that's only half the story? You see, new research is suggesting that the brain isn't just a passive victim here. Its own cells might be active soldiers in the fight, with a memory all their own.
And that's the big question at the center of this incredible new study. For so long, we've seen MS as an outside-in problem. But this new research is forcing us to ask a really fascinating question. What if a big part of the fight is actually coming from the inside out? Okay, so to really get why this discovery is such a game changer, let's just quickly go over what we've always understood about MS. Right, so the classic picture of MS is this. Your own immune cells, think T cells and B cells, get confused. They start seeing the brain's protective insulation, which is called the myelin sheath, as some kind of foreign invader. So they cross into the brain and just attack, stripping away that insulation and messing up all the communication between nerves. And the cells in charge of making and maintaining that insulation? They're these guys, oligodendrocytes. A great way to think of them is as the brain's master electricians. Their whole job is to wrap the brain's wiring in that myelin, making sure all the electrical signals fly across the brain super fast and efficiently. In the old MS story, these cells were just the innocent bystanders getting caught in the crossfire. But scientists at the Karolinska Institute started to wonder, are these electricians really just passive victims? To figure that out, they decided to zoom way in and launch this incredibly detailed cell-by-cell investigation to see what was really going on. To do this, they used what's known as the EA-MES mouse model. It's pretty much the gold standard in the lab for simulating the kind of inflammatory damage you see in MS. It lets them watch the whole disease play out, in real time and in incredible detail. Now, here's where their approach gets really smart. They didn't just take one snapshot. They looked at these brain cells at 3 totally different moments, right at the beginning of the disease, then at the absolute peak of symptoms, and then way later in the chronic phase. So what they got wasn't just a single photo, it was the whole movie of how these cells behave. And the tool they use to read each cell story? It's this unbelievably powerful technology called single-cell multi-omic analysis. Okay, think of it like this. It lets you read a cell's current to-do list, that's all its active genes, while at the exact same time, you're reading its entire instruction manual to see which pages are highlighted and ready to go. It gives you this stunningly complete picture of what a cell is doing right now and what it's getting ready to do next. So they ran this super detailed analysis, and what they found, well, it started to completely rewrite the story of MS. It turns out, these brain cells are not just sitting there taking the hits. This picture really tells the story. On the left, you've got the cells in a healthy brain. And on the right, that's what's happening at the peak of the disease. It's not just damage and chaos, it's a total transformation. The cells are actually reorganizing and changing who they are. And here's the absolute kicker. The oligodendrocytes weren't just dying. They were actively changing. They started switching on immune genes, basically taking on the role of immune cells themselves. The brain's electricians were starting to act like soldiers. And the numbers here are just staggering. Even in the very early stages, more than a quarter of these cells had already flipped into this immune mode. At the peak of the disease, that number jumped to 2/3, a huge majority. And even later on, after the main attack was over, nearly a third of them stayed in that altered state. They weren't switching back. So, the fact that these cells stayed changed long after the attack, that led the researchers to a pretty wild idea. What if the brain cells themselves were somehow remembering the inflammation? This idea is called epigenetic memory. It's not memory like you and I have, but it's just as powerful. So imagine the cell's DNA is a giant instruction manual. During an attack, the cell frantically flips to the emergency response chapter. Well, epigenetic memory is like leaving a permanent bookmark on that page. So even after the crisis is over, the book is still open to the right spot, making it way faster and easier to launch that same response the next time. So to test this, they designed this beautifully simple experiment in a lab dish. First, they exposed some of these brain cells to an inflammatory signal. Then, they washed it all away and let the cells just rest for 4 days. And finally, they hit them with that exact same signal one more time. And the result was absolutely conclusive. The cells that had already seen the signal once before, they mounted a much faster, much stronger immune response the second time around. They remembered. That bookmark was there, and they flipped right back to the emergency page. It was proof that the brain's own cells can hold a memory of inflammation. But the story gets even more detailed because it turns out that not all of these electrician cells are reacting in the same way. The researchers actually found two distinct groups with very different jobs during the crisis. They found two main subtypes, and we can think of them as the fighters and the repair crew. These cells, which scientists call MOL2 and MOL5/6, took surprisingly different paths when the disease hit.
The MOL2 cells. These are the fighters. They went all in on the immune response. A way higher percentage of them, almost 40%, transformed into that aggressive immune-like state. They really seem to be the ones on the front lines, sounding the alarm.
But then you have the ML5 and ML6 cells, and they acted more like a repair crew. Their immune response was way milder. Instead, very early in the disease, they started cranking up their production of cholesterol. And why does that matter? Well, cholesterol is a key building block of myelin. It's like while the fighters were joining the battle, the repair crew was already trying to patch up the damage. So let's zoom out. What does all of this mean for how we understand multiple sclerosis? What's the big picture here?
Well, this fundamentally changes the entire narrative. MGS is no longer just a story about an external army attacking a passive city. It's much more like a civil war, where some of the city's own residents are actively participating, remembering past fights, and choosing to be either fighters or builders. And this, of course, has massive implications for treatment. For decades, we've been focused on stopping the immune system from getting into the brain in the first place. But this research gives us a brand new target. What if we could develop treatments that don't just build stronger walls, but actually go inside the brain and convince its own cells to stand down, to basically remove that epigenetic bookmark and forget the memory of inflammation? And that leaves us with a really provocative final thought. We've spent so much time trying to silence the body's attack on the brain. But maybe, just maybe, the key to truly winning the war against MS lies in learning how to gently persuade the brain to forget it was ever in a fight at all.